that was the reference really to Lost Connections. That's by Johann Hari, and within that, when we developed the idea about the virtual festival, we sort of segmented up in conversation to the various themes, and so this theme is really around solitude in the time of strangeness, and it refers really to issues around mental health and the use of process and poetry in process, and where during COVID-19 in the last 11 months, and the unknown we are living in has made itself even more tangible in our lived experience. We have always been living in the unknown. It's just that now we experience it more vividly, be that across a spectrum of clarity or fog. A time of strangeness where reflections on what really matters happened. Some things have become clearer, human activity and environmental impact. For example, when the wrens began to sing during the day and we breathed cleaner air for 2 weeks. Other things became darker, more anxious or depressing. People began to dream more vividly as the imagination and minds tried to make sense of this new perception of how the world and our lived experience is. I think here poetry, writing, reading, and the processes of both combined have a great deal to offer. So without further ado, in the programme order, Rachael Clyne, Tina Goncalves, Jess Mookherjee and David Caddy, I'll ask our guest readers in turn to introduce themselves and say a bit about where they're coming from, their work and responses to the themes, solitude in a time of strangeness or connections, light and darkness. Then after the conversation, ask our guests to read for us. Halfway through the readings, between Tina and Jess, we'll have a 5-minute comfort break and then return for Jess and David. But to start off, I'd like to ask our readers to introduce themselves and just say a little bit about their own work for 10-15 minutes each, and then we'll go back to the readings. So over to you, Rachael.
Okay, well, I'm speaking to you from my, what it has been, my therapy room and study. I'm in Glastonbury. I'm semi-retired now, but I've worked since the 80s as a psychotherapist and counsellor. So I have encountered a lot to do with solitude and mental health issues. And I live alone. And I think perhaps that's one of the main reasons I'm on this panel, because I'm somebody that lives alone, and during lockdown that had its own issues, really. I'm used to being on my own. I didn't have a cat at that point. Thankfully, I've got one now for the next winter period. But, you know, there were times when it was really, really difficult. I missed conversation. A lot of people talk about missing hugging, missing touch, and I didn't experience that so much because I just don't have that experience much these days. Being over 70 and with health issues, you know, one was steering clear. So I was very aware of that. And one of my main fixes is connection with nature. And I'm blessed with a lovely view, but it took a long time for me to cross out of my neighborhood. I felt like it was almost like the Mexican wall. I couldn't cross beyond it. So, and I'm somebody that is quite open to thinking about, feeling about, and writing about the dark. So there's a few dark ones in my reading. But I was very, very aware of people who were, didn't have an outlook, didn't have a view from their window. People who were perhaps at risk of domestic abuse, being locked down with their partner, and mental health issues. and also just the treatment of the elderly. So there were many, many things that were very present with me. And at first, I think, like most people, was in shock. It was hard to write. It was hard to actually, because there were other more pressing things to think about, like everything has to be thought through. You know, how are you going to get your shopping? How are you going to deal with somebody leaving something at your door? All of those things. Everything has to be thought through all the time. And as lockdown has changed, it's become more uncertain. With lockdown, it was clear, and it was intense, and at times blessedly simple and quiet. And then as we started to move out of lockdown, it became a different kind of anxiety, and we're kind of there now, wondering whether we're going back in or staying out or what we're doing. So those are some of the things that were very present with me during the period.
Thanks, Rachael. Did you want to say a little bit about your work and your poems? Because I know that you empathise very well with the animal world, an instinctual world, and a performance world.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned your books or pamphlets and things,
Yeah.
but do you have a new body of work that's developing out of your experience now?
I kind of had a writer's block for about 18 months. I just, you know, I was actually producing far more than I realised, because consciously I just felt I couldn't, and I've hardly been submitting anything, but a body of work has been growing. And I've kind of put things into loose, you know, mounds to be sorted. Somebody's looking through one lot at the moment. And I've also been taking part in activist stuff with Poets for the Planet, and we've just managed to record our collective piece Into Beings, which was supposed to be at the Lyra Poetry Festival in April, and will now be shown as a recording at the Bristol Literary Festival in October, and we'll have a panel discussion. And I love working collaboratively. There's not so much, there's one or two nature poems, but it's more about the human world, I think, my reading this afternoon. It's a mix.
Thank you, Rachael. That's brilliant. Tina, would you like to introduce yourself and a little bit about where you're coming from?
Sure. So I'm an Australian and I'm in exile in Europe. So I actually begun the lockdown with a trip to Egypt, and that became Spain, and then I was locked down for 4 months. Well, a bit under that in Spain, and now I'm in France. So I've certainly got some things to share around that time, and so yeah, I've been writing poetry since I was quite young, and also meditating and going on spiritual retreats and such since I was quite young as well. And so those two things have kind of morphed together more recently, as in the last several years, I guess. But yeah, I was reflecting earlier that I found many creative ways to destroy my work when I was younger, whether it was burning it or drowning it or making paper mache. And then it was just in the last few years that I'd stopped doing that, and I realised that I had enough for a collection. And in this lockdown time, I completed editing that collection, and I published it recently. So in terms of the topic, what really is present for me is there's a certain shock in the complexity, that there's a polarization that happens because of this complexity, and that's being faced with that complexity has often been a source for me of kind of disconnecting and turning toward that which I know, which is myself in this moment, in the most simple sense, and being okay with knowing, being okay with not understanding, being okay with uncertainty, and being able to be in relationship with that and find the beauty within that. And so as someone who meditates, I consider meditation and contemplation as a form of intimacy with myself, and then by extension with everything that's within my awareness. And my poetry kind of emerges from this place of intimacy, where my senses, where my perceptions fuse with the object and form something. And so yeah, there's a lot of power for me with poetry and the spiritual journey and the being able to be and accept what is. And so, coming back to the solitude and, loneliness, that includes the whole spectrum of everything. It's about not rejecting anything in a way, because we can then become our own loving witness and our own self-compassion. And so this is a meditation for me in a way, in this time that I've had periods of like absolute joy and stillness and no disruption, and then I've also had to face the reality that I can't really go where I want to go. I can't go to my family. So there's the grief and at the world and my personal things. So within that, there's I feel there's a practice to be accepting and loving toward whatever arises within us. And I hope my work reflects that.
Thank you, Tina. That was great. Thank you. Jess, would you like to introduce yourself and a bit about your work?
Sure. Hi, you can hear me okay? It's really nice to be here, actually. I've really enjoyed it the last couple of days. For me, it's my work. What to say? Everyone sounds really clever and like they know what they're talking about. I'm not sure I do. I'm a public health consultant, so the pandemic arising in January really was a test of everything I've trained for and everything me and my colleagues have trained for. So it was quite, at first we were, quite optimistic. We thought we would be, doing what we, writers like to write, and public health people like, a problem to sort out. But what was really very quickly clear to me was just the nature and scale of everything. So I was very quickly put on to work on recovery, even right in the middle of the pandemic, right at this, the February, March bit when, we were seeing lots of deaths. So it was really strange for me to it was almost like I was split into three. I was a poet, so I was still writing, trying to write, and within that then I'll talk about that in a moment, I think, about solitude, because that's quite different, I think, to loneliness and that sort of dislocation. But I was also a professional, public health professional, trying to respond to all of the things that Rachael just talked about. One of the things that I was working on was, how do you get contraception to people when everything's locked down? You know, what's you know, and it was sort of things that you wouldn't think about. And then being put onto recovery. So then starting to think about the impact that this is going to have on everybody. So I started thinking very globally. And where I got to was a really interesting place that I think Tina touched on, which is compassion, a settling, and a forgiveness, and an acceptance of everything that's around us. And that's because a lot of the theories and reading that I was doing was I was having to do because I was having to think about ways to protect the population's mental health. And it was really interesting about how people deal with terror and how people deal with death. And then going back to your theme of your very clever theme, I think, of the festival, which is like this darkness and light, the two aspects. Here we are watching bodies pile up, you know, mass graves in New York. I mean, who would have thought it? You know, I was talking to people who were saying it's like being in a film. And it's like being in a film because we've watched these films. And here we are now, stars of this film of a pandemic. And we're all on Zoom, you know, so we're on screens again, watching ourselves, watching each other. And yet we're so disconnected as well. And what was interesting for me was that the pandemic only exposed the cracks that are already there in everybody and the cracks in society. All these things are already there. So however dislocated you are more in that crack. However whole you were more whole in that crack. And I write about that. So I will be talking about that. I'm really interested. My own poetry talks a lot about dislocation. So I've got a Bengali background in terms of my parents being Bengali. And we were, you know, hearing about that in the last session as well, migration. Do you feel at home? You know, and it's almost like, and again, talking about mental illness, anyone who's read any of my work will know that I write from that place where my mother had a mental illness, but also my whole family. And so it's the fractures and fragments that are in us. And I'm quite fascinated, and a lot of my poetry touches on the idea of where we find normal. You know, we talk about the new normal. Well, what is normal? And how does somebody who feels strange feel normal? And where, and how do we find the exotic in ourselves? A few of us were talking about this in one of the breakout groups. And, you know, the eyes of a foreigner are not only for foreigners, they can be for everybody. I'll read a poem that's inspired by John Clare later. And I know that he had a bit of a breakdown when he was asked to move from one village to another village. And he, you know, there's this idea that that the strange and the settled are both in us. We're both nomads, and yet we both need a home. So I will be talking about all of that in my poetry today. And I've got and my collection is called Tigress, and it's with 9 arches, and I'm sure it'll be wonderful anyway to hear everybody's work. I'm looking forward to it a lot. I've learned a lot today and yesterday.
Thank you, Jess. That's brilliant. And now, David, could you introduce yourself and a little bit about what you've been working on?
yeah, I find it very difficult to talk about myself. It's not something I like to do, and don't really do it that often, apart from when I meet students. So I got really nothing to say about myself, in all honesty. I think what I can say is that I've experienced lockdown as dislocation and inability to do the things that I perhaps most wanted to do. However, within that, I have really enjoyed doing weekly poetry workshops and focusing on all the elements of this particular festival in those workshops. So the Solitude and Strangeness was a workshop between one on obsession and one on fragments and stillness. And my aim was really to explore a range of poetic approaches to this current condition and to draw in a wide range of poetry and thinking around those circumstances. Now, as part of the workshops, I was also writing, and I started writing a series about a character who is somewhat unreliable, I think is the good way of describing him. And so the challenge was to write a serial poem and incorporate the theme, the set task of the workshop within the series. And they are a series of interiors, all of which are triptychs, and negotiate a range of experiences from a somewhat, as I said, unreliable narrator. And the situations he finds himself in become somewhat extreme, and the poems became more difficult to write as I'd gone through those series of extreme situations, with lockdown occurring within the poems, as it were, and then trying to sort of develop the series. And I suppose it could be said it's a bit like, if you're in South Africa, Binnenlanders with the sex, or if you're here, it's the Archers with the sex. So, but as I said, he is a very unreliable narrator. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, David. Thank you. That's great. Okay. Well, would any of you like to say any more in response to anything that the readers have said? Rachael, what would you like to say?
Yeah, sorry, I mean, I realised I was just reeling off rather than really connecting. But I'm somebody that's very much of a climate activist, and for me, it's part of the bigger picture that people seem to, we seem to treat things, events like episodes. You know, this is where our attention is now, but we don't put the pieces together. And for me, the sort of disruption, it felt like the planet had cast a very swift move by stopping us in our tracks and making us look at what we're doing. And that was very much with me at the beginning. But it's almost like climate change got lost in this, the immediacy of the virus. But it's all part and parcel of the same thing. And, you know, the disruption in cities with civilization, to me, it's part of the larger movement of what we're experiencing on this planet now. And that can be overwhelming and very hard to face and feel at times. And yet it is there, and we have to find a way to be with that. And I was very much thinking what Tina was talking about earlier, that being fully present in the moment, because that's all we have.
Yeah, do you mind if I'd quite like to say something about the spectacle. I'll have a poem a bit about that. And I was quite taken with one of the things that really affected me was the clapping, because what became quite clear was everybody is in their own world, and thinking that their world was the only world. And that was such an interesting phenomenon for me, because while and I was perceiving everybody as sort of, learning Tibetan and, pottery and, and whereas I was working really, really hard, or worst working from home ever. Mostly when I work from home, I just watch daytime telly, and eat cake. And here I was actually working really, really hard. And I wonder really about how you all feel about that being so separate and dislocated, and thinking that we can speak for other people. And how does that arise? How do we cope with that in our poetry? Who are the worthy? Were you clapping for me? I didn't think so. And that creates dislocations.
I agree.
I don't know, Tina, do you have any thoughts? Because it was interesting to hear you talk about presence and calmness, because there's an awful lot that solitude brings us. I mean, how do we become people without that? How do things emerge out of us, not being caught up in a spectacle?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you said just a minute ago about, can we speak for other people? It's like, well, we can't. So there's there's such an honesty in realising that, and a profoundness in realising that, and just realising our own bubble. And there's such humility in that. I really appreciate that observation. And I think that, that's part of the reckoning in a way of this period is there's a fertile ground for a new level of humility. Yeah.
It's also that we're being asked, or we have been asked, to act on with attention and consideration for other people's lives and safety. And I think that the kind of whole panoply of human behaviour during this has really shown us that difference. Those who will do what they need to do, even if it kills them, not if it kills them, but people who say, well, I'm not seeing my children, I'm not seeing my parents because I want to protect them. And people who say, oh, well, I don't care, I don't want my rights stomped on, and I can go where I like, that sort of, those mentalities and those behaviours. And as a society, we're not used to it. We're used to having our way.
And this interesting thing about writer's block, and how close to trauma can we be before we start making sense of it and writing about it. I mean, I think all of us poets have to go through that process, and yet we've all experienced something collective and individual, your darkness and your light. It's given us an opportunity to connect, and yet it's stopped us touching. And that's a really interesting exploration in poetry as well.
Sure. I was wondering, David, I've been wondering, since you said you don't like to necessarily talk about yourself, and I do respect that. I'm just wondering how much your dreams have affected your writing, and how much living in the time of strangeness has influenced perhaps changes that you're able to notice in your own work, David.
Well, I think you'll just have to wait till I read the poems is the only thing I can say about that, Andy, because you've hit upon something which the poems relate to. What I would say, though, is I got particularly angry at the clapping. I know my friend Rachael, who works in Poole ICU, she's an emergency nurse, and she was very angry by people clapping. you know, she went from a ward with 8 people on to a full ward of 16. Then that ward spread into 2 further wards, and she was looking after initially 1 patient, then 2, then 4, then 8 per night. And she was doing originally 10-hour shifts, which became 14-hour shifts. She was experiencing people dying, spending months on ventilators, then with a very long period of recovery. And speaking to her, it was clear that the governments were very inept in their handling of the crisis, were peddling, frankly, blatant lies. I got very angry with people like Matt Hancock and his assumption that he is world class in what he's doing. So my anger is fairly vociferous, as you will doubtless hear.
Thank you, David. I mean, I can empathise with that, because I think I clapped for, I think it was 3 weeks, and then I thought, no, I can't do this, because there's lots of people who have voted for the situation that the NHS were in.
Exactly.
By voting Conservative.
Tories were the clappers.
And
this is a, you know, Rachael, not a Tory. She said, "Do not clap for me. Do not clap." We did make the first few weeks around here, we made a hell of a sound, hell of a banging and clapping. And then we spoke to people like her, and she said, no, we don't want it. She then told me a lot of jokes about the black humour of working in ICU, which kind of like took the conversation to a different place. And that's her coping mechanism. Yeah, it's been extraordinary talking to her about her experiences. So they do come into some of those poems, not the ones I'm going to be reading this afternoon, but that direct experience and the lack of PPE when the government was saying, oh, there's plenty of PPE, we're sending out billions. Well, the reality in a rural Dorset is no, we didn't have any. Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to that entirely, because all of a sudden I became a key worker in two roles. One as a part-time Waitrose delivery.com driver on a Saturday and every other Sunday. And secondly, with Somerset County Council driving. I mean, I've been driving a minibus for schools, special educational needs bus, but then I was suddenly put to the task of delivering PPE all of a sudden, and it was, as well as free school meal boxes for children, you know, that had free school meals. So immediately I then became a key, you know, my roles in society suddenly became elevated, only to be crashed back down again with the prospect of you know, barely managing to have an income. You know, it's just ridiculous.
Well, I think, as John Lennon said, don't clap, just throw us your money. Really, but I think that the inability to I think the inability to understand different people's contexts. It's like a war. Everybody has a different war. Not everybody's on the front line, and not everybody. And also, I was both moved and distressed, and felt very guilty about the clapping. So on one level, I knew that people need an outlet, that people had been in shock, and they need to clap. They need to do something community building that holds hands across villages and cities, and it was intensely moving. But for me, they weren't clapping. I never thought they were clapping for me. And I spoke to nurses and doctors, and they also felt the same. You're not clapping for us, really. You're clapping for yourselves. And perhaps that kind of, that dichotomy, you know, that there could have been there was an opportunity to have a really good conversation around that. And I think we missed it. We missed those conversations. But hopefully they'll come out in our poetry.
Yeah, and I think they'll come out in conversations like this.
I think there's another side I just want to bring in, you know, all of the other side of the both and, if you like. I've been very much involved over the past year with the local town council addressing climate emergency and trying to build resilient community. And you know, Glastonbury is a town of individualists, but within days we had the most fantastic volunteer network set up. It was so well organised. People were shopping, delivering. We had bikers delivering medication, there were telephone change, and there were all sorts of those things that happened. And I think in some circumstances, what you were talking about with the clapping, I know, for example, a friend that we both know, Hannah in Devon, said it was so important because it was the one night the whole street came out and came together. So I think there have been some, you know, the other side of that is people extending their kindness and being very generous with their time and energy.
Yeah, I think that's also indicative of. I mean, there's a term, isn't there, in psychology of cognitive dissonance, and how you know, you can try and hold two opposing sort of thoughts in the head at the same time, and that's. I think that's reminiscent of also with what's happening with polarization.
I think that was this very interesting conversation about polarization the other night, and absolutely fascinating one for poetry. And, you know, you'll all know about all the issues around Black and minority ethnic population being more at risk of COVID and all of this. And I've been dealing with this sort of daily at work. And what's so interesting is when you speak to anyone from a Black and minority ethnic community, everybody just says, stop talking to us. We know what, you know, the structural racism, we know about it. Talk to white people, you know, talk to the indigenous population about why it is that Asian doctors were being put in the hot zones and white doctors were cutting toenails. You know, why is that? And, you know, people, and what's absolutely fun, I loved all the poems in the last session about weeds and nature, and this idea of, you know, the creatures and plants in an ecosystem can be in a land and yet be very easily uprooted, but can give to the land and yet feel dislocated. And it was just a very interesting analogy to give, really. And now you've got the blame, you know, are Asian people, are Black people somehow genetically inferior? Well, again, COVID exposes what's already in society. It exposes what is already there. And I wonder whether those are the things that we will be writing about over time.
Yes, because the term that came up was the global majority, not the Black and ethnic minority, but the global majority. And it's us, you know, the white privilege that really are in the minority.
Well, I wouldn't even say it was distinctions. It's very difficult to put those distinctions because, you know, you've got poor white people too, and it's, you know, there is poverty and then there is one planet. And I wonder how, with poetry, who loves the gaps and the fissures and the cracks of things, you know, how will poetry contain that?
Well, thank you, Jess. I think, shall we move to some readings? Yeah, is that so? Can we start with you, Rachael? Are you happy with kicking us off? Oh, hang on.
Okay, it's all right. I've unmuted now.
Okay.
So I've got my little script on the screen. So I'm going to try and cover some of the themes. I haven't been part of the other conversations. What I'm going to start with was a project that really did keep a lot of us going during lockdown. A Frome poet called Liv Talk organised something she called Haiflu, where she wanted to document the mood of each week of the lockdown through haikus and photographs. And an avalanche of the public, we just sent our haikus in and our photos, and then she put them into videos, which caught public attention. It was on Women's Hour, it was on the news, and she's got another project going at the moment. So I'm just going to start with a few of the haikus that I wrote, one of which got into one of the videos. This evening's moon, a growing crescent, as Venus shrinks from its back. Zoom quiz night with friends. My belly ached from laughing. You can't laugh alone. I'm so sick of me. These 7 weeks have made me feel old and worthless. While Johnson fiddles, the virus still burns out lives. People jump off cliffs. In the sun corner, beans climb 4 canes tied with string. It is as it is. I've got a cat playing with my slipper in the floor beneath my feet here. Anyway, the next one, Write Out Loud put out a competition and got about 2,500 responses for an anthology, which the proceeds of which will go towards NHS charities. It was called Beyond the Storm, with Andrew Macmillan judging it, and I got a poem in, and it's a kind of has a biblical tone. The Book of COVID. A nation shall turn against nation for the last macchiato, and people will slaughter each other with a hug. Neighbour will smite neighbour for a dog biscuit, and children will beat their playmates for a bar of Snickers. Yea, it shall be so until the last can of beans, which will be worth more than a house. And the rich will skulk in bunkers with bodyguards who know which side their bread is buttered. Then neighbour shall join with neighbour for solace. And townsfolk will swap coats with each other, and we shall shop and cook for one another. On Wednesdays and alternate weekends, we shall plant seeds together in cities, knowing that we prepare a bed fit to lie in. And we shall rest in it alongside each other and survive another season that is unrecognisable and shall be known by another name. So this next one, thank you. So this next one is about being the age I am and very aware of the particular effect on the elderly of the lockdown and the whole situation and the way it was handled. Before time. With hedgerow hair and tangled thoughts, I forget how to work the cat flap. I mew to go out, stare dumbly at the open door, then turn and curl back into my cardboard box. There's a needy child in the understairs cupboard, whining that she's got nobody to play with. This planet has had about enough of us. Just when I thought we'd kick death into a long grass future, culling the elderly became the new agriculture. Will I queue 2 meters apart for a neat euthanasia pack? You've had your lot, now do the decent thing. So I think one of the things that I found hardest during lockdown, the days that I found hardest were days when the wind just howled the whole day long. There were 2 or 3 of those, and it really got to me. And this is a nicely spaced out format. I can't show you it, but there's gaps and the words are flung all over the place. This wind rips through routines, blazed skin, flings a watering can across the garden of my mind. Its clatter nags nerves, seeks the tiniest crack in my fences, throws up what's buried, untethers grief, loosens my grip, rattles the rawness in my chest, taunts my isolation. Its constant whine buffets my frustration, spins me into a cringing creature bleating mercy with paws over my ears to shut it out. I'm an animal who thrives in warmth, perhaps a stir of breeze in heat, not this howling. Elegy for Easter 2020. Sparrows are nesting in the firethorn. A woman round the corner struggles to breathe through scarred lungs. After 4 weeks, she's still grateful for life. Meanwhile, through the party wall, next door's bed springs crescendo as procreation's rhythm mounts. A friend, sweaty from cycling, delivers yogurt to the side door. With gloved hand, I take the pot, leave it on the patio. Later, with a different gloved hand, I'll put it in the fridge. With naked hand, I'll put out peanuts for the badger's treat. Spring blossoms into Easter as the virus reaps 1,000 lives a day. And on each station of the cross, a chest rises, falls, and rests, the end of a 12-hour shift. That one's going into a Poetry Space anthology. So I'm right in the darkness now. I will come out in the light, I promise. This next one's very personal, and I suppose it's not the best poem, but it's very much expressing something that I felt very strongly, because towards about 2/3 of the way through, in the last quarter, as it's called, Black Lives Matter exploded, as if people had only just noticed that the police were kneeling on black guys when they were arresting them and stopping them from breathing. I wrote a poem about that I don't know, a few years ago with Errol. I can't remember his surname. I want to say Errol Garner, but he was a pianist. Anyway, the other thing was that with communicating online through email, WhatsApp and text, it's so easy to get into misunderstandings. And I got into a real tangle with somebody that I'm involved with, a local Extinction Rebellion friend. And it was really difficult. It pressed into a lot of my own wounds. And this is how I kind of processed it, really. Neither black nor white. I gave her a tiny example. How people used to ask, "What are you doing for Christmas?" And I'd reply, "I'm Jewish." And they'd say, "Yes, but what are you doing for Christmas?" She says, "Yes, but that was just ignorance, not thoughtlessness." My body freezes to make me invisible. There it is, that veiled accusation of making a fuss, exaggerating, as if ignorance has less sting. She has Black Lives placards at the ready, but when I point out the error of saying all lives matter, she questions my support, demands explanation. I use the term hijacking to describe how that phrase steals another's limelight, negates their experience, as if you knew just how they feel. Yes, it's subtle shades that erode without you even catching on. Unlike the shock of spit in the face, a boy yelling "Christ killer" when I was 7, or the whole class staring at me after someone who was my best friend said, "If you let them in, they just take over." No, it's casual remarks and the unspoken that shaped my shame. Men telling me how Jewesses are so dark, so exotic, or being told, "You're such a victim, too full on. I believed it was my lack, my neuroses, took decades to grasp. Talking with a black woman later, we shared the same slights, the same racist fantasies. I still feel an imposter. No numbers tattooed on my family's arms. I still apologize, cannot speak up. At least with my skin, I can hide, be traitor to myself. This next one is actually about a client, and just to assure you, I do have their permission for this. And it was published recently on Atrium online magazine. And it's called The Weight. The image of a bleach bottle at her lips lingers in the room. Its walls echo with car crash sounds. I feel the draw of a noose, her urge to jump. Each week she pleads to stay. With fixed eyes, she forces me to deny her, make her leave. I cling to my professional chair. She's already had her week's ration, so pills are off the menu. I wonder if she'll be here next week. She asks for a method that's certain. I'm silent. The crisis team can't do home visits. They too are in a critical state. An overdose merits a day in A&E, then a cab or a 20-mile walk home. Her GP has become a placebo. Somehow they muddle through, he says. I know he cares, but like me, must wait for her storm to break. I just want to reassure you that in fact, that period, a client I'd known for many years and had been actively suicidal. This was such an intense period. But it kind of became a breakthrough, and she's not felt suicidal since. She's completely transformed. Don't ask me how, but I'm pleased to say. And of course, this whole issue has been remarkably powerful during, mental health issues have really had a bashing during lockdown and pandemic. So I want to move back into the light for the last two poems. And as I mentioned earlier, it wasn't till May that I kind of felt like there was an invisible wall. I could only be in my own local neighborhood. Oh, by the way, this is the room where that previous poem happened. This was where I see clients. I only see them on screen now. Anyway, in May, I managed to break my taboo, and I got to the Somerset levels. I got to one of the sanctuaries that I love visiting on Shatwick Heath, and it's just so important. And this is the poem that came from that. Today, the light, spaced with diamonds, how it dapples the green, then pools, slices through gaps, silhouetted by branch fretwork. It zings, skips over willow leaves, the ecstasy of summer unleashed without us. A fledgling hops up a branch. It eyes sallow seeds, fluffy as itself, before tasting one. Blown catkins carpet the still dark of peaty water, crisscrossed by leafy peepholes to endless blue, and a lake mazed with yellow lilies. Breeze tips corners of lily pads, reveals pale undersides like promises that scatter on leaves, a herd in song of great tit, chaffinch, Chetty's warbler, calling in new life. I too find myself newly fledged. And that was one of the most exquisite things for me about lockdown, was just the spring allowing itself to unfold without us oppressing it and chasing it and stopping it. It was just stunning. So I'm going to finish with a little holiday, because that's also one of the things that I've missed and still miss. That going off for day trips, going to the seaside, mooching in shops, having a lovely lunch and a cream tea in a village shop. I just miss that. And when you live alone, you know, it is part of the pleasures of solitude that you can do that. So this is a kind of compilation fantasy, really. Lockdown holiday. I idle through Lyme Regis or St. Ives, drawn by something in a window, a ring or a Christmas gift perhaps. I relax into aimlessness, let my eyes feed desire. Mostly it's the colours and lure of linen trousers, tops in shops whose women never hassle. Year after year, I revisit favourites, replicate the same garments, earrings. Some I wear, some hang limp in wardrobes. I found a vintage creamer in chrome with cane-bound handle and railway insignia. I relished its presence on my breakfast tray, till tired of polishing it, sat it on a shelf. It's about the moment of finding a love object and those memorable watering holes, the beach cafe that with scrummy fish soup, or I might fancy tea room nostalgia by Village Green and Duck Pond. I'll walk into the light programme, to the mellow sounds of Pat Boone, a medley of tea sets and tea cakes oozing buttered sweetness. Then I'll tread a narrow coast path, garlanded by campion, sea pinks, gorse. Above, lark song in a cerulean arc. Below, sparkling vista and bob of Seal's Head. Now I am full and ready for home. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Well, now I'd like to ask Tina to read for us.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, and I just want to say thanks also for having me. It's a really wonderful opportunity to share my work. So thank you to everyone who's organised it and to David for inviting me. So I'm going to be sharing from my collection. It's called Tasting the Stars, and it's contemplative. So it's going to be, so that's the space I invite you into for the reading. And I'd like to start with sharing a quote from Neil Postman, which I consider to be like a cone. A metaphor is not an ornament. It is an organ of perception. A metaphor is not an ornament. It is an organ of perception. And so with that, I've also got a little preamble poem. Dear one, I promise when you call the great love, love hears you and knows the sound of your name. Your essence beyond time is a petal in the heart of God, shining the light behind all gods. To love, you're an offering, a path of bliss. Perfect, God breathes you, forges your hand, weaves these elements, sending others to slumber for millennia upon millennia. Now here you are, awake in a body of earth and water. alive with consciousness, moving slowly, shifting atoms about. Dear one, I promise, when you call the great love, love hears you and knows the sound of your name. Love is written in your essence. You're made of particles, vibrating, finding each other, melding to create new forms. Inside you, outside you, beyond you. Life is living with and without you noticing. Every day, the butterfly goes on as the heart aches. And you are being forged simply to remember. The God in your hands, the God in your heart, the God in this land, the God in this tree, the God in all things, and the love. So, I'm not used to reading and explaining my poems, so I probably won't be doing so much of that. We'll see how I go. Wildflower love. This state of heart is not a destination. It cannot be anywhere but within. Here I listen for a fragrance of stillness, wait for silence to emerge. The mountain knows. Flowers still bend toward the sun. The ants go about their day. Weeds and the wild flourish. Nature goes on, eating itself and making as I pause. Recipe. A spirit rises, taking to this sea, soaring. These wings, unseen, immutable grace, gathering in flight to a world unknown, craved for. The spirit glides along the precipice, sharp-eyed, hunting for discovery. This next poem is written in Dharamshala, which is where the Tibetans live in exile in India. Butterflies of the Kangra set adrift. These white spells of light, rising tiny flutters from the edge of the world, their oblivion unknown. Here, folded in this nuance of hope, delicate as silk gold embers making love to the void. Here and there, monks burn, their wings offered in sacrifice for freedom, their ashes set adrift as these butterflies continue to rise. Jewel of sea. Jewel of sea shimmering, crowned by the glory of sun, beckoned skin. Every molecule rich with providence promises. Mountains of swell, mighty lulling, liquid light submersed, silent, white, breathless, tumbling. Equinox. An equinox standing with you, these pinks and blue, blending the edges of sky, and this salty wind in the wild, rolling. We, wrapped beneath this shawl of mine, our skin shimmering, our breath cooed by moon rays on incandescent sea, our scent draws us in, falling. This touch of you so smooth on my wings, your silk threaded through essence, freedom melded with love. Open to tantalize, you hold these strands of me quietly, weaving my core in your embrace, drinking the flame silence. You take me in, you till the ground, gather my soil, soft, comforting. You take me in, where each breath allows a sacrifice to this moment, and I die in the expansion and live. You take me in, hear the heartbeat, where irrefutable love is. Keep me at the gate. Keep me at the gate of your heart, lest I enter unworthy of knowing your light. Take me in your sun, burn my existence until only you remain. Involution. A million stars shining as one. I'm the lock and the key and the keeper by the gate. An infinity of worlds, a dot below the quintessence of life holds. Fluid of eternity. Love, the unbending longing for the sun. Breathe now. Slow the course of story and verse. Abide here. Allow. The wind has no resistance, nor the sun. In time, all is forgiven. All is worn down to the fragrance of light and dust. It's time now to undress. Massage the pains you avoid. Take a moment to feel the unloved, the unwanted. Notice who and what you reject. What do you see? The touch of your presence is a gift to yourself. See, your heart was always leading me. True, strange arc time shining. I was so crazy, humbled, infuriating. Love, it leads me still. We circle. We are a story of two lines venturing each other horizon until one day we meet in the autumn we embraced. As life moves away, let them forget us. Grace will have the final say. Senile to the moment our eyes met, and I walked up to you, shining. Bless. Bless this ode to simplicity, inherent as I pause in the paradise of this moment, delicately cherishing here, this paradise of my own two hands. I am a goddess in the grass, softness beneath my feet, pure sky, light dancing. Above I can hear myself shining, diving in this bliss. I kiss the sparkles, gather stars like daisies. Remember, I am. In cima de mesa, which means it's Portuguese for on top of the table. In cima de mesa, like caress, opens her. There's nothing to do, everything to be. Petals or sea. Raining light. I think I've got a couple of minutes, right? Yep, okay. Raining light. Take a deep breath. Let the world melt. In this valley of the heart emerges nectar. Enter the radiance, dissolving, succulent as water, raining light. Sahara. I'm ready. Everything has returned to light. The cosmic wind and sand of the eternal has worn everything away. Joy remains. Here I surrender to eagles of time, beloved, delighted. In vastness, soft constancy, you can find me bathing. And last one. Mat, as in the goddess Mat. Everything is love. Everything. Great truth is indivisible beauty. Love is all there is. I think that's it.
When you're ready, Jess, we'd love to hear from you.
Okay. Well, I've got a job to do now, haven't I? To get everyone, I don't know, roused up again or calmed down again, or a bit of both, a bit of darkness, a bit of light, a bit of, I don't know what, a bit of dislocation. So mostly all my poems are miserable and depressing and about dislocation. So there you go, that's me. So if you don't like that. No, okay. So hopefully what I've prepared is responding to some of the other poems actually. So hopefully you'll see some resonances anyway. Okay, I'll just start, I think, and I've got them on my screen, so I don't have to read out of the book. Shall I start now?
Yes, do, Jess.
Okay. All right. Thanks for inviting me. It's always good to be here. I'll start with a poem which is in my collection, Tigress, but is also published in Tears in the Fence, or Tears in the Fence. And this is Bite Mark. The night I open the doors and windows of my house, it enters like a crumpled child. We're both amazed as it sets out from the street, all sweet. It lights a halo round our hair. It stains my cups with red wax, shines our secret marks, leaves inked thumbprints on the stairs. It lights the colour of your eyes more like steel, makes you forget almost everything. You speak like the chime of a clock. Tell me that I don't want the likes of you inside my house. A warning louder than a snake, and I laugh out the owls that nested inside me for so long. Gaze as they fly to the rocks. It gently bites, a singed kiss as it passes to wake us. It turns you into Orpheus as I step on its bite. My hands scared with your wound. I keep it open with my teeth. I'm not sure what that poem's about, actually. Anyway, so the next poem is called Playgrounds. And thank you, David, for publishing it in Tears in the Fence. Playgrounds. Blood. Write down 1,000 times how we are plagued. Each day a new lesson, correcting a bitter herb of past. Today I spill things, feel gravity change, makes me appear stronger than I am, blood being thicker than it looks. Frogs. The frogs sit on my hand, cover me in embryos, in my state of eggs. I feel my belly. Clock the boy in school, so proud of his tiny prick. I pinch it. He says, let's get married. So I run to the toilets and cry, don't let me have to look after all those million babies. Locusts. I turn to swarm, learn tit for tat, tag your it, tiger attack. What's the time, Mr. Wolf? I didn't look at the blood smash from our dinner plates, hurling at her. How she breaks. Left to eat how I write. I'm not like her. Write it 1,000 times. Lice. I, with my shaven head, write down 1,000 times. I must not lie down in the street or in rooms with dogs. I itch scratch my sores, lick dust from my paws. Bitten by unforgiving bursts, I crawl and hide under crevices, cracks and flaws. Boils. I'm plague, they say so in the papers. I'm swarm and flooding. I see a father on TV clutch his baby daughter, run for miles for help, her leg blown off from landmine over paddy fields. I'm a mutiny, a dare to be, a bomb. She's a mad cow, he's rabid. Cattle. And I'm training to be a vet. She feeds me fish's fingers. He talks about nuclear threat. He's in chemicals, takes refined oil, blows it, abracadabra, turns it plastic, boils and chokes into baby whales and cadavers, and I must recycle, become a vegan, write it out. Weather. 1,000 times. Again, build a shelter from discarded water bottles to keep me safe from hail. I love thunder and weird, weird weather. Don't admit it. Complain that I can't let any of it go. I watch the snow burst my pipes with locust spores and I cling to the sky. Darkness to save me, to my love of things to placate me. Smooth out cracks in the paper so I can write out 1,000 times all my lines of effigies. The dark is pregnant with the little I have. At 0 hour, I watch your face, release you from the grasp. Animals. Perhaps something will stick, thick with lamb's blood and all a flood of ink, rehearse in lips these last days of songs, and it might let us go by the look of the book, by the quick of the land. This is how I'll transmit the spit of my life and keep writing the lines over again. Firstborn of how we find each other in the debris of burning streets. We're tapped on our shoulders, told to wear a sign and badge. I'm not my mother. I'm not my mother. I write 1,000 times, and you're not your father. And I write, uncurse, uncurse, uncurse. Slight change of pace now. And this is a poem about Ariadne and Theseus and what would happen if they shared a flat. Well, not really, it's about whatever you want. Ariadne and Theseus. She can't see his faint tang of musk, wrapped, smothered in disinfectant and aftershave. A spray of perfume to hide emissions of shame. He leaves windows open to let his scent out, scrubs his skin. She breathes his shirt stink. A pain dims. He can't hear her body against him to get his bearings. Twig hurt underfoot, marks gouged in bark with fingernails to find his way back to her in the dark. The rub of rope skein burnt on his hands, her trail of spider silk unravelled, finding his feet, his blood reaching out. So it's nice to get those published in Tears and Offence, thank you. So I'm back to Tigress now, and this is a poem which was, when the book was reviewed in the Times Literary Supplement, this was called Immigrant Gothic, and I quite like that. So this is my Immigrant Gothic poem. The Welsh House. The house is covered. A skull embarrassed, by ferns and firs that hold its bone face in quiet shame. The concrete porch steps are now slippery, wet, and covered with slime. I'm careful now, though I bounded them as a child. You told me I fell at the top of those stairs, and you held me, presenting me to the new house, like coming to a new country. We disappeared into this house, where we loved but couldn't touch. Leaves against windows, scribbling, shouting, and rain and more rain. Inside, mother's silent terror and decay. I grew and left. You clung to that house, to her, year after solitary year. She went mad inside that house. An immigrant madness, lost in Hobson, Jobson and Hub-Hub, lost in the Chittagong Hills, lost in the poems of the 12th century Indian kings. I was the foreigner. This house, surrounded by doctors and teachers, decays behind a green, tangled fan. It urges me to run away, while both of you have become native to her wet hands. The house whispers, we do things differently here. And interesting, we were talking about the lockdown, and I came across this really great article, which was about just before the Holocaust, that people were collecting all the dreams of people, and that's been published in a book. It must be amazing. So this is in Tigris as well. This is called The Diary Entries. Day 1, I forget myself, dream about him, the same one for years. I go through old diaries, scour for certainties, events, accounts of places I visited each day, neatly underlined. Day 2, I find only dreams recorded. He's in them, holding me, putting up curtains, arms around the house, telling me not to worry. Sometimes in spring, surrounded by blossoms. I'm leaving. Day 3. Harrying down dark streets of forgotten Camden, breathless in a tower block, I enter a flat. I open drawers, letters, cupboards, read everything, to lie, cheat, steal my way into someone else's life. Day 4. I hide out. I didn't write down who I was running from. I'm beside myself, shoot myself in the foot, reread all the dreams I ever had to search for him. I'm certain I know their meanings. And on the subject of dreams, again, this is a sort of found poem, really, because I was looking at dream dictionaries and also a book about neuroscience of dreams, and so I've woven all of those together. Dream dictionary. Abandoned, apple, abattoir, ace, agent, art magazines, ash, autopsy. They don't disguise their meanings. The outside and inside become the same substance. They enter anyone, no warning, from everywhere. Arson. This dream means a change for the better. Bear baiting, bedlam, bedroom, beast, biplane, bride, burden, burst. In bouts they reorganise, file ourselves and forget. Places with no footholds gather and pool together. All possibilities fire at once, even ones that don't exist. Baby. Nursing a baby means impending disaster. camera, catgut, corporation, creature, coattails, cutlass, cauldron, crone. Hot zones, break them, waking in different states, in stages. It's a theatre, the one where it projects, always on, always listens, the beginning of fiction. Corpse. A dream featuring an autopsy portends an unusual and interesting experience in the future. And I'm just going to check. I'm all right for time? Yeah. Okay. This poem is in Tigris as well, and it was inspired by a painting, but also a trip that I had to Scandinavia. You are in the hard places. I was wild-haired in the wind on that boat across ice water the summer I left, my tongue tasting juniper, out as far as the island, out across rock. Son of God means something different here. Son of man is edges. I wanted to find yours. They built on top of old things here, tales of Weinemann and old tales, stories much more like water, sound from dipped paddles, swing of oar, slap water, something in the bite. Those green-eyed half-women retreating into forest, their nipples hard against rock, lips turned black. I forgot you there. This church is beard bristle, and your laugh, bell sounds. This church is Sabellius, and I climbed inside the swell, reciting tales of old Weinemann and brave Weinemann, and how he became the Son of God, and how I melted into rock. So, thank you. And this is my lockdown poem. It's going to be published in Agenda, I think, quite soon. And it's probably the only lockdown poem, or one or two lockdown poems that I've written. So I offer this to you. This is called The Painter of Modern Life. I visit art galleries inside my television, where the Chinese artist smashes a house down, serves the people crab as a mark of respect, a dissident joke we don't get in the West. I pretend to read Baudelaire, my bookshelf a delight these days, but admit to who will care on Facebook and TikTok. The children, scared as I once was, throw charades of brave and fierce shapes. They don't know what's new, lost, or gained. I share the space and ask the man I'm locked down with, back in the day when we wore such beautiful clothes, were we stranger then, or just the same? He answers, we no longer exist, and smeared with bleak extremes of shame, listen to the street clap and wring their hands. Now the artist, man of the world, man of crowds, and a lost child are pixels made of light and words. The papers aren't printed and don't say anything anyway. We watch the news every day, stare at death on television, and I walk for an hour in an ever-growing careless tide. The bluebells are wilder this year than ever. He's so busy piecing it together in America on YouTube. I try to tell him about bluebells. I mute meetings in Zoom, pretend to be on important calls. Crowds are no longer our domain. I think it'll blow over, I lie. He can't listen as I reach for utopia, a new Jerusalem where no one drinks or smokes. He says, what about Africa? What about your family in India? My aunt sends flowers on WhatsApp. Show your father the tulsi in our garden. I report back that he doesn't want to see them or speak to anyone. My sister says my mother's fallen so far away. I tell her to call 111 and that helpline they set up at the council. WhatsApp blinks in messages. We went that time to Belumath in 73 after the war. Do you remember? Your father met a monk called Jithen who invited us to eat with him. My Didi, your baby sister, your parents, my mother. He blessed us because you were from England. How funny. Ask your father. I send her a picture of the cherry blossom outside my kitchen. No, I don't remember. Show your father the tulsi in our garden. In England, they call it holy basil. I want to become a bluebell. The kids on TikTok make Big Macs, KFCs, Nando's at home, and we watch robots make love on TV. He's dreamt it before, he says. Perhaps he's Shiva, who dreams of destruction. I've sent away for an effigy of a Norse god. I say, little things make all the difference. We change. A virus changes. I see tigers in cages on Netflix, but they're no longer tigers. I paint this in quarantine with graphs, no touch, no mask, no means of escape. And if you don't mind, I'll just do one more, my final poem. And this is very much about home and what it means to an immigrant to have a home. This is called If John Clare Was My Father. He might have taken me to look at what makes a land and person, counted my meters by weather, held my hand as I stumble from rocks into spaces that he could understand. I might ask him where summer comes from. Now, it arrives sure-footed as I slip into ditches and fissures. Quarantined since March, this village retreats to where I am. With just an hour's walk to see bluebells turn to the brightening light and blend into streaks of flesh that withers to make way for wild garlic, fern, then quaking grass, then soft rush. That's where I am, in the in-between, wildflower and weed, wedged in his words and the summer. My bold, clothed father is in good mood. His dinner's just right, nothing yet smashed. He sits reclined, reading the ancient poet's tales of seasons, a courtly flourish from a distant land. He can still taste its spice on the back of his tongue. There's another voice in the sedge grass, a poor boy, singing with words as sharp as a violin, of a land that gives and takes. A man a few doors down waves at me from his mother's house where he's lived 70 years, sleeps in the same bed where she bled into the streams of iron-rich springs. I'm where the rocks break, the breeze between hedges and verges and settles, twists into the shapes of our shadows. That's where I am. A place where rivers force upwards, burst through in a gash of small wounds. That's where I am. And it would be my home if John Clare were my father.
David. So when you're ready, David, in your own time, I think we would love to hear your poems.
Well,
Just
thank you
wondering.
very much. I'd like to start off by thanking Rachael, Tina and Jess for their wonderful readings. and also to thank Louise and the members of the workshop group who commented on the early versions of the poems you're about to hear. So I'm going to read various interiors, and I'll just read the number. The numbers correspond to the weeks in lockdown. So number 1 is the first week and so on. And I'm going to concentrate on the early part. In the latter part, there are different voices, but we'll start off with the early ones, I think. 1. On his daily commute, he saw a woman so alike an ode flame that he couldn't stop wondering if it was her and what she'd done in the intervening years. He obsessed over their past and the prospect of seeing her again. Days and weeks went by in a dream. Months later, he was coming home late and tired from unfinished reports and saw her alight at a station stop. She smiled and waved in his direction. He was elated and waved back until, turning around, he saw another man smiling back at her. Posts mark out the invisible path. Walk on through to the other. Swans take to the field, their manner expanded. Keep focus, or the figured world will simply vanish without a word. She nursed her silence until the words exploded. Expectations overwhelmed, took root beside themselves. Some knotted words cannot undo what others have done. She did not want to see what might be there. 2. I woke up in a bed I did not know, next to a woman I did not recognize, with no memory of how I got there. I quietly dressed and left the house with no understanding of what had happened. 2 days later, I was still getting flashbacks of a drinks party after work. I opened the newspaper to read that another woman, the owner, had been murdered in that bedroom. Dear Michael, thank you for your letter. I'm flattered by your comments on my work. However, I'm an actress and not the characters I portray. I believe that you're in love with Zola. You don't know me at all. I was paid to portray a fictional character. And I'm nothing like her, apart from liking the odd G&T. I was blessed with wonderful makeup and wardrobe artists in my work. I'm not like Zola at all, bless her. I am sorry. I'm happily married, mother of 2, thank you. Kind regards, Catherine Parkinson. I woke up dishevelled after a restless and tempestuous night. I'm finding it hard to breathe. I'm fed up arguing with idiots who say that the media are overhyping the threat. They think that this is a holiday, driving to the beach and visiting friends. Catherine's letter was terse and unsympathetic. I've decided that I no longer like blondes. I keep getting flashbacks from the drinks party and at the house. I think that my drinks were spiked. The brunette must have known the murdered woman to have accessed the house. I guess that my fingerprints will be all over the bed. I'm expecting the police to arrive any time now. 3. When I arrived, my friend was feverish and could hardly breathe. He was emitting tortuous sounds as if his diaphragm had collapsed and was in such pain that I wept. His hands were lifeless. I was bereft and wanted to look away. Instead, I did what had to be done. The paramedics were 90 minutes away and had refused to take him last time. The shock of what had happened suddenly hit me. My fingerprints were all over the pillow and I should not be there. I woke in a large house with different landlords, anxious by the absence of a lock on my door, and found locked doors everywhere. The landlady, a homely Irish woman, was seemingly spending the night going from one bedroom to another, or so it seemed during a restless night. The landlord was obsessed by Admiral Lord Nelson and somewhat upset when I quoted from Lady Hamilton's love letters. I subsequently had to block his entrance into my room. The morning after, I went to my car and found no body. 2 goats had wandered into the street. My half-open black briefcase lay on a low brick wall. I worried that a bomb might be under the car. 4. I woke to find my girlfriend had slept in a trunk rather than spend the night on the sofa. I spent the morning trying to think how I could keep this information from leaking, only to blurt it out to my wife when she came home from work. The wind dies to a quietness. Nothing moves. A faint, distant sound. A door slowly opens inward. Against all the odds, a door opens, like getting access to a parallel text. Bolt and catch, lifted, probed. I stand naked. A package. No, a small box. No, a package. Lifts and moves closer. Lifts and moves closer to me. Lifts and moves and stops. By the railway crossing, I see a woman lying across the track bed, as in the silent movies. I tentatively walk towards her, unsure as to her motivation. As I come close, she gets up, adjusts her skirt, and slowly walks away. 5. Every morning I wake knowing that I must open the batting against an unknown bowler on a dry, worn, grassless pitch. I slowly walk to the crease and take a centre guard, survey the field, align my thumb to extra cover, my chin next to my left shoulder, and look directly ahead. I keep rubbing my eyes. A new life begins away from the senses, layered hurt, the discreet charm of restriction. There is an unspoken exchange. To touch again. The stillness aches beyond reach. Light moves away. Here again, only darker. You move slowly. You move again after so long. To touch after crisis. Listen to divine voices against a maze of prohibition. Stay in until lunch. 7. Dearest, why do you affect not to know me? I know that we're socially far apart, but really? I can't stop thinking why you blank me. I'm sorry if I said something to upset you. The intense silence weighs me down. I have to go away to make ends meet. Fresh as vigorous, skirt as edge, soft as slow, daffodil as death, lamb as snot, tangle as trout, disdain as tune, would not as do not want to, cry as apology, refuse as if, living as vital, bliss as polyvalent, lust as vigour, wind as wend, vicarious as compost, seasonable as appropriate, snob as spit, fight as slob, lord as misrule. I see a sheep leading a man out walking. I was struggling and had to get away. In haste, I fell twice and twisted my knee. A flick changes everything, and I'm looking at the neighbour sunbathing in her garden. Bikini clad, she is sipping plims with a jug by her side. A man is watering the peas and can't keep his eyes off her. I yawn, and he is gone, and she is watering the peas. 10. I was recommended to Skype with a therapist. She checked my background as if I had the disease. For MF, you wrote Marxist feminist. Yes, I replied. Education, she asked. Cambridge. She was writing. Figures, she replied. What are your addictions? Well, I'm partial to mixed fruit, otherwise I have none. Really? Do you drink coffee? Yes, I said. Good. Don't give it up. You'll go crazy. Have you asked your vicar for advice? No. She's as screwed up by class and status as anyone I've ever met, I trumped and ended the chat. A walk on blue slate, flattened ragwort, sparse to verge, fizz to sulphur yellow brimstone, more elusive orange tips, hard against a jade and Kelly green vertical cut. Skeletal oxeye daisy, coltsfoot, and nettles tilted left, as if light was all, growing tall in brilliant May sunshine, and in the thick of vegetal green alert to thistle, thin, many-headed black dogs, cleavers, enchanters' nightshade, bindweed. I sensed that I was being followed and quickened my pace. My thoughts dipped back to school when I first realised that success was linked to ruthlessness. I knew that I could outwit him and took a shortcut home. I found my wife had an unexpected visitor. They were looking into each other's eyes, and so I slipped into the kitchen. Later, my wife confided that the woman had been forced to leave her husband and needed a place to stay. 13. I had a series of emails from Leonid, my old student. He asked if I could house his friend Svetlana, who had to leave Lewis in a hurry, and I was happy to oblige. She arrived in a bright yellow VW, emblazoned with alchemical signs. She caused quite a stir in the village with her black mask, long legs, and hot pants. I had some difficulty explaining her presence to the neighbours until I cited Dominic Cummings. Things got out of hand after she had a succession of day and night visitors, and the neighbours threatened to call the police. Dear, I'm thrilled that you found my Methodist of birds in line with your understanding. The yellowhammer does indeed breed late. The quote is from As You Like It, and yes, I do sometimes babble like Touchstone. Last night I dreamed that my wife was attacked and eaten by a swan. I made a trap to catch the bird, but only fell in the river after getting tangled in netting. Later, I dreamed that I was flying along the river with a kingfisher with human eyes and a face like the harpist Michaela Davis, playing birdsong and ripple with Bob Weir and the Wolf Brothers. I woke with blood on my fingers and was somewhat disorientated until I recalled that I'd been playing guitar all night, soothing the neighbour's wife and daughter. 14. The ash trees with lichen and canker have attracted some strange breed of rook. They are bluish black with vermilion legs and gold-tipped talons. They could be some hybrid wood pigeon or lesser spotted woodpecker out of harmony with its main species, a sort of rogue subspecies intent on colonizing dying trees and making their name the ashpecker rook. I don't know what they are. Oh. I kept averting my eyes from the screen. My contributions were acerbic. Afterwards, they praised my precision and guidance. I wasn't comfortable. I wanted out. I knew that I was a fraud and let the meeting drift as if I were a mere observer rather than the convener. I was empty, and someone insinuated that I'd had a bad case of the Kruger-Dunning effect. I had to see the therapist again. She is a nutter, berating me for not taking her advice about getting a pet. I explained that we're still in lockdown. She started beating her heart with a fist and asked about my blood type and whether I had metal on my body. A dog or cat would do, she said. What about a caged bird? I tried. A bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his rage. Mare Angelou? I asked. A bird is non-judgmental. Worms, I said, are not torpid in the dead months. She smiled and said time was up. Thank you.